So I wanted to address this. Everyone says they are autistic without an actual diagnosis. I have a child who actually is. He requires quite a bit of resources. When neurotypicals claim autism, it gives a false sense that children and people need less support. It hurts my son's chances of getting real support. Not everybody says they're autistic without an actual diagnosis. That's statistically untrue. Certainly there are those who are self-diagnosed, but self-diagnosis does not get you resources. Self-diagnosis can open up the conversation of what resources can look like. For instance, I was self-diagnosed before I got a formal diagnosis, but it was a privilege to get a formal diagnosis because the doctor at the time was doing them for free. He's no longer doing them for free. Here, at least in British Columbia, Canada, a formal diagnosis for an adult is around $2,000. So instead of us having the conversation about formal diagnosis, we should be talking about how can we increase access to assessments. And I also disagree that when neurotypicals claim autism, that it gives a false sense that children and people need less support and that it hurts your son's chance of getting real support. Certainly, I'm not going to negate your experience if that has been the case. But when we talk about resources, a lot of the time, you need to have a formal diagnosis to access them. So for instance, my formal diagnosis is the reason why I can receive financial support from the government. But without that piece of paper, I wouldn't be able to get it. So I'm not sure how somebody saying that they're autistic is going to reduce resources for somebody, when again, you need that piece of paper to access it. Certainly not all resources are funded by the government. Some are funded by organizations that may not require that. But I would imagine that folks would have to go through quite a lengthy screening process in order to access those programs. And if that's the case, they're going to do their due diligence in terms of how they're going to be spending their money that they receive for those programs, which again is very difficult to get. I was going to help a local autism organization run a self-employment program, but they couldn't even get funding for it. So instead of us focusing on what people are not getting, it's super important to try to focus our efforts in getting involved in nonprofits and organizations where we can actively assist them in fighting for more financial resources so that more people can get assessments and more people can access help. Because as it stands for autistic adults, there's really not much of anything. So it can be really hard to access resources if they don't exist. And certainly power is in numbers. So the more people we have talking about the lack of resources for autistic people, the better.